Now, when you come to design your character or you're thinking about your character, when you're starting your story, you have likely got down the basics, such as, you know, their age, their physical description, what do they do for a living, where do they live, and, you know, maybe if you're like me and you write paranormal, then there'll be a species type and things like that. And then you'll also want to give some thought to their personality. So you might have a character sheet written out, and maybe, you know, maybe they're rather introverted, or maybe they're overly extroverted. Maybe they just have a small group of friends that they're very close to, or maybe they're very involved with their family. There are different things in, like, how do they manifest themselves? Do they always giggle when they see something horrible happen, or do they crack jokes in an inopportune time? Are they a useless drunk? You know, all different things. Their personality is an important part of what makes them relatable to your readers. So it's always a good idea to have a handle on that. You're also looking at things like backstory. Now, I am always very cautious about the concept of a character's backstory. With a backstory, I have seen some authors get so weighed down in it because they've put so much thought into it that it actually lends too heavily on the storyline. And that's not always appropriate. Backstory is a bit like world building. It's the sort of thing you thread in through your story as it's appropriate, rather than info dumping on a poor reader and probably another unsuspecting character, because that's usually conveyed in dialogue. I think sometimes that can weigh things down, particularly if it's not relevant. So, but it is probably always a good idea to have an indication of what that character's backstory is. They don't just appear fully formed out of the ether. And a lot of what a person might have gone through before would help determine their actions in the plot going forward. But it's sometimes that's the sort of notes and what have you that is best kept off the page rather than on when you're writing. But it is always handy. And I know a lot of authors who put a lot of thought into their character's backstory. But does that make them interesting? Their relationship with others is another important thing. And this is sometimes where I struggle with gods, because um, even if we have gods walking among us, you know, our ancient gods walking among us, which is the premise in my stories, then they're still probably not going to be the life and soul of the party, or somebody who has a huge group of friends or things like that. Particularly in my world, I'm constrained by the fact that in the God series, paranormals aren't known about. So, you know, the wolf shifters and the vampires and the fae and the mages and everybody else that live in our world at the moment, that humans are not aware of their existence. So that would make it more difficult in the case of an ancient god, for example, that they are probably more likely to have a very small select group of friends, if they're going to have any at all, or they're more inclined to just pretty much just go about their business rather aloof and not having anything to do with anybody. But those relationships with others is another important dynamic in your character, and helps to give the reader some expectation of how they're going to respond to various plot points throughout the story. And I think one of the other things that is also really important before you even start writing your book is finding out what is your character's why. I know it sounds a bit arty-farty, but it is actually a thing. If you have an idea